and welcome to Legal Aid Explained, project of the Greater Chicago Legal Clinic. I'm Adam Salzman. I'm Executive Director of the Greater Chicago Legal Clinic. Thanks for joining us. On this program, we like to check in with practitioners of legal aid, which is legal services provided for people who may not be able to afford an attorney on the private market. That's what Greater Chicago Legal Clinic does. We provide attorneys for individuals who may not be able to afford an attorney on the private market, and this show right here is a way of explaining to folks what resources might be available to them in different legal venues. So you'll see that our phone number is right below Greater Chicago Legal Clinic, 312-726-2938. You are always welcome to call us with any civil legal problem you may have, and we will do our very best to point you in the right direction. Today I'm very pleased to have Jeff Whitehead, who is the supervising attorney of the Greater Chicago Legal Clinic's HARP program. HARP is an acronym. It stands for Homelessness Advice and Representation Program. And Jeff, you have a long history with the clinic, but we've been very fortunate recently to bring you back to our organization to run the HARP program as the supervising attorney. Tell us a little bit about the program and the service it provides.
Sure. So the HARP program is designed to help folks who are afflicted with homelessness. So the people that we talk to are generally in a transient situation where they're in a homeless center or homeless shelter for a period of time, and they find themselves there. But there's some sort of legal roadblock that's preventing them from otherwise getting the housing that they need. So what we attempt to do is to connect these people who are in a tough spot and get them into the right legal representation so that they can solve that problem and then find the job they need, or find the apartment that they need, or find the family legal resources that they need in order to get past that roadblock and find housing that's more sustainable and avoid the streets altogether, frankly.
Got it. And one of the words that you used that I think is a really important concept to zero in on is the idea of roadblocks. So one of the things about HARP that I think is very unique is we will come to the potential client rather than the potential client having to come down to our offices. And somebody who is dealing with homelessness, if they're fortunate, and there aren't enough of these facilities in the state of Illinois, but if they are fortunate, they will find themselves in what might be referred to as an interim housing facility. You mentioned shelters, but these are places where you can temporarily have a bed, and some resources available to you, social services and therapeutic resource, maybe medical resources, employment, counseling, those kinds of services to stabilize your situation, help get you back on your feet and on the path toward obtaining permanent housing. One of the things that we noticed at the clinic is that among those resources, you don't often find legal resources. And that's a problem because of these roadblocks that you mentioned. Now, when you talk about legal roadblocks, I think one way to think of that, and you tell me if you agree with this, one way to think of that is very oftentimes if you have somebody who's in a situation where they're homeless or they are encountering obstacles to obtaining permanent housing, the reason, or at least one major reason for that, is a legal problem, a roadblock. So give me some examples of legal problems as they might manifest in this situation.
Sure. So one example that we're seeing quite a bit is someone who's had some unfortunate criminal history in their past that is preventing them from getting the kind of job that they want. So we all know that it's hard for folks who have got a felony record to find a job that can provide an income sufficient to have sustainable housing. So a mistake that you may have made when you were 18 or 19 years old can still be haunting you when you're in your 40s and prevent you from finding the housing that you need for yourself and perhaps for your family as well, because it's a cascading effect. You can't get the job that's commensurate with your experience and talents, and since you can't find the job that pays right, you can't afford housing that makes sense, and then the car breaks down, and then there's a cascading effect that low income situation creates that prevents someone from getting the housing that they need. So there's I think most folks are familiar with the concept of expungement or sealing a criminal record. If we were able to take that individual, again, made a mistake when they were in their, let's say their 20s hypothetically, if we can seal that such that it's no longer on a criminal record, and they go in and they apply for that job and they say you've got the skills and talents and all the human resources that we're looking for this position to pay a very nice wage, you can now, that person's able to get that job because the roadblock, that criminal conviction from a long time ago is no longer on their record. And then you can go from there. Now they've got a decent job. Now they're able to provide for their family. They're able to fix the car so they have transportation to get to and from work. And then they can afford the apartment that we would be looking for. The other thing about that is that sometimes this isn't all the time, but sometimes landlords will look at a criminal record too, and if you have a conviction and you fill out your apartment application, at times that can prevent you from that could be a roadblock to prevent you from getting housing as well. It's a very common situation we're running into, Adam. Another situation that we run into is folks that have debt issues. So if they have medical bills or just credit card debt that has crushed them financially, sometimes that can lead a situation where you can't get the apartment that you need and you find yourself in an interim housing facility. So that happens as well.
So, for example, if I am a landlord, somebody comes and applies for an apartment, I might run a credit check.
Yes.
And if you're somebody who has a high amount of credit card debt, or somebody who got behind in paying exorbitant medical bills, that could show up on your credit report. It could reduce your credit rating, and it could cause the landlord to decide not to grant you a lease.
That's the kind of thing. So you need an ultimate fix for that problem. So sometimes that's a debt settlement, but more often than not, for folks in that situation, it'd likely be a bankruptcy. In which case, the legal clinic has many resources of private attorneys who we would refer that kind of case to, who might give you a break on the fee and help resolve that debt issue.
Right. So that's an important thing to point out. So let's talk a little bit about how the HARP program works. So you and our paralegal, our outstanding community outreach coordinator, Katie Jackson, who has been on this project from the beginning, you both visit these facilities, and what happens when you show up on site?
So we'll get to the facility. We're usually in a room that's got some privacy associated with it, because these are sensitive issues, and we want to respect the. It's a private issue. No one wants this kind of stuff out there. No one. So you could expect a situation where we're going to be able to have a frank conversation without people listening in, and I've been doing this for 20 years, so I'm very good at. I like to think I'm very good at understanding the situation that you're in. I always start with a leading question. Tell me what's going on. Tell me what brought you here today, and the design of that question is that you got something you got to get off your chest. You're just going to tell me everything, and I let them for the first few minutes of that conversation. I'm just going to listen to what you're saying, follow on, get a feel for the situation, get a feel for your situation, and then after you've kind of had a chance, because if you're there, you've likely had a chance. You've been waiting to talk to someone with some legal experience for quite some time. Then I'm going to start asking some questions about, okay, well, you mentioned an expungement situation, or you mentioned that you might have some immigration issues, or you mentioned that you got evicted from a house previously, and that's creating a legal roadblock to housing. And then we'll start poking in and trying to find, I'll try to issue spot that and find out exactly what's going on. I'm likely going to ask for additional documentation. I can't tell you how helpful a piece of paper can be from a court or from a financial institution or any kind of official piece of paper that just, it maybe doesn't make a lot of sense to a person who's getting it in the mail for the first time, but to an experienced set of eyes, you can look at that piece of paper and learn a lot about what's going on with the situation very quickly.
Important.
Yeah. So if you could bring documentation, very helpful to us. Now the nice thing about the program as it's designed is that if it appears that you need to have a service, if you need a legal service of something that the clinic provides, the clinic has got 23 really experienced, really smart attorneys work for them. If your situation fits into one of those practice areas that the clinic already has, I'm going to help you get into that practice area because I view this as almost is probably the key part of what I'm doing is that I'm going to help you pull the paper together, pull the files, pull your file together such that when it goes to, for instance, our immigration team or our criminal records group, they're looking at, okay, good, this file's put together. I just have to do legal work now. I don't have to chase down additional information.
Makes the intake process at the office that much simpler when it comes fully packaged.
Right. If you're in the situation, you want to be a good client because you want to get out of this situation. So a good client is someone who responds to their attorney timely, who, when asked for documentation, they provide it. A good client is truthful with their attorney and doesn't hide certain things because they're embarrassed or think that it hurts their case. Be truthful, be honest, provide the documentation.
Because conversations with your attorney are confidential, just like a conversation you might have with a physician or a member of your clergy. Those conversations are protected by attorney-client confidentiality.
Right. So you're going to want to. You can be rest assured. You can relax in the idea that that's going to be a protected conversation. Adam, I wanted to tell you something. I didn't get a chance to mention this to you. I went to Pacific Garden Mission a couple Saturdays ago, and I had a nice tour of it. And if you ever get a chance to go there I think it's 3:00 on a Saturday, they have a little radio show and they'll give you a tour of the facility, and it's interesting for anybody that want to go. But they were talking about how there's 700 Venezuelan people that were seeking shelter there right now. From the best I can tell, these are people that just were almost, I don't know if refugee is the right word, but they fled Venezuela, traveled up Central America, eventually got across the border, and then they must have got bused to Chicago. I mean, imagine that journey.
Wow.
And so they're here in January or February in Chicago and looking for a place to go. That's 700 people in just one shelter in Chicago. I don't think they have papers. I don't know the legal answer for those people. And I don't know that I don't know what an immigration lawyer does with that either, because there's just so. But my point is that there's such a need for this type of service, and I'm very excited to play whatever role that we can play here to try to make it better. Because any resource that we can help people be a sustainable economic unit for themselves and for their family, we all are going to work together, and we're all going to make a better society if we can do that.
Absolutely. As we always say, in legal aid, we've never had a problem with demand. The problem is with supply. And so we try to do our part to plug those service gaps. It's interesting that you would mention a situation with a refugee population because as you know, one of the things that we do at the clinic, and previous episodes of Legal Aid Explained have focused on this, we have a thriving immigration practice. Have you, in your time at HARP, had an opportunity to see how somebody's immigration status can impact their stability of housing?
Right. So we've seen these clients in our database. So it's exactly the kind of facts that you might imagine. Someone is undocumented, and that puts you in a very weak position in our society. It means that you're always you're always sleeping with one eye open.
Mm-hmm.
You're always wondering, what, you feel like you can get if you're
Waiting for the other shoe to drop.
Yeah, you always know that things are just not quite right. You don't have legal status in the United States, and that's a tricky place to be. So ultimately, something bad does happen. You're working at a place under the table, and it gets raided, and all of a sudden you're not working anymore. Or you can't get the job because if things are going right, you really shouldn't be able to have employment, W-2 employment without a Social Security card. So you can't find the employment, you don't have the income that you need, and you find yourself without a place to stay in a housing situation. So now I do want to draw a distinction between the Venezuelan people that we talked about, who are literally here with just because they woke up one day and they found themselves here. Many times you have people here who are in various stages of the immigration process. So they got here. We don't really need to talk about how, but they're here. They're working towards becoming what's called an LPR, legal permanent resident, but they either haven't quite filled it out or haven't quite gotten there, or they're trying to get citizenship, but the citizenship process is very complicated and cumbersome and time consuming. So they're at a various stage in there. I think that's a nicer is not the right word, a more that's a situation where our immigration team can really help. The immigration law can really help. Someone who's in the immigration process and they're stuck for some reason, and they need a legal professional to get them to the next stage, to get them to become that LPR status, or to become a citizen potentially, so that they can then they have the full rights and privileges of being. So they got a Social Security card. They can get gainful employment. I mean, I view this as a situation of we all are born with certain talents and strengths and weaknesses, and as a lawyer, I want to try to help people be able to take advantage of whatever set of gifts they bring into this world, and such that they can help themselves and help their family and live a life that is that meets not their need, that meets their goals and provides them in our society as
and
with
brings them out
of
of the shadows
yes,
as well.
Yes. It does no one any good to have all that you are as a person, and all that you can bring to us as a society, and just sit there and not be able to take advantage of it because of a drug conviction when you were 18, or because you were born on the wrong side of a border, when you were a baby, and so can we as lawyers help those people get past those roadblocks and live their life to the best of they can, to the best of their ability, and achieve all their goals. And as a society, we're all going to be better off. We're all going to receive the fruits of those labors.
Right, absolutely. I think that's very well put. And I also note that when we talk about removing obstacles to mainstreaming into society, there has to be at some point the removal of practical barriers. So one of these obstacles that we're confronted with over and over again in the legal aid space is simply people's inability to get from point A to point B. Transportation, simple transportation, is often a real barrier to obtaining justice. And I think that's why it's so important in HARP that we travel to these places rather than forcing people to come to us. And I think the notion of a pop-up clinic where you're almost like a tactical mobile unit. You move in, you set up, and you open your doors to people who may be able to utilize your services. I think that's a really important innovation.
And you're being modest because this is your innovation. It was your idea, Adam, to do this, to do these pop-up clinics. You saw the need, and the transportation issue, I think, was probably front and center in your mind. You're like, I need to. We need to, as a legal aid service provider, meet people where they are, and I think that's your driving force when you were designing this and talking to people and funders about how this program might work. So, I want to thank you for that vision, because I didn't see it necessarily. So,
well, it's great to have you on board, and we're fortunate to have a really good team doing this work. And we're only as good as the folks on the team. Really quickly, because we're running short on time, I just wanted to bring up family law and the way that family law, and in particular domestic violence, can be an issue that presents itself at these clinics, and how we attempt to address that.
Yeah, so those are heartbreaking situations, because you have a situation where the homeless person there's a house available, but it's unsafe for them to be there. Mm-hmm. So they've got to exit a situation, and they're in a interim housing facility. Our domestic violence group would intervene in that situation and provide legal protection for that individual, usually in the form of some sort of protective order. And that can be done by definition quickly, because if there's a long legal process, it can bad things happen.
Right.
So sometimes, like, you need to have this done this week because the weekend might be a problem. Mm-hmm. So that's a situation that we've got a very experienced group. I think that's been a core practice area for the clinic for probably 25 years,
a long time. Yeah.
So there's a lot of experience. Unfortunately, I don't think there's a story that we haven't seen.
Yeah.
And so that if that's a situation that you're involved with, that's something that we would be just honored to help people with.
And it's fairly straightforward, right? If you find yourself in that kind of a situation, and you're at one of these facilities, there may be children who are impacted as well. You can, you mentioned earlier the idea of issue spotting. You can pick up on that, and as long as the client is forthcoming, you can refer them to several qualified practitioners at the clinic, and even beyond if there's a conflict or some other issue.
Sure.
Jeff, I really want to thank you for all the work you're doing, and also for being available to discuss your work with us today. I know you're a busy guy. Just very briefly, I was wondering if you could just say something about yourself, why you became a lawyer, and why it is you continue to do what you do.
It's interesting. So I think. So I became a lawyer. I've been a lawyer since 2000, so 23 years. Time passes quick, doesn't it?
Wow.
So I remember when my dad was a small businessman, and he when I was late in high school, maybe even college, as I think back, our butcher shop burnt to the ground.
This was a family butcher shop?
A family butcher shop in rural Ohio, mm-hmm. and I remember. My dad was a good butcher, but he wasn't a businessman. He wasn't a sophisticated businessman, and we just the whole process of going through the claim with the insurance company, we didn't understand what was going on, and I think I remember saying to myself, I don't ever want to be in a position where I don't know what I don't know, and so it made me very I understood what a tough position that fire put our family in. And I wanted to be able to help in that situation. When you have problems, you need to know what the processes look like. You need to know how to fix those issues or to mitigate them. Yeah. And that's the reason why I wanted to become a lawyer. And I moved here in 2000. I worked in the corporate setting for about 3 years. I had a private practice where I did a lot of debtor rights work, and then I worked for a former program of the legal clinic called Legal Advocates for Seniors and People with Disabilities, and that program was focused on helping individuals, normally seniors who have debt issues. Yeah. And I did that for, I want to say 15 years.
Right, and that's how I first met you, yes. And it's been a pleasure working with you and a pleasure talking about these issues with you, and I want to just thank you for everything you do. And we'll see you out there in the trenches.
Okay, thanks for having me.
Thanks, Jeff.
Take care.
Appreciate it.